Hey everyone, this is going to be a slightly different presentation because I want to cover some strategies. Now, in neurolinguistic programming, the heart of all of NLP really is modeling. What we're trying to do is to go inside the minds of other people by examining what is happening outside of them, like their behaviors, the way they speak, and so on. Now, this particular talk by Brene Brown in 2010 is a fascinating one because there are so many interesting moving pieces that a lot of people are not aware of. So as we go through this explainer, I'm going to do a frame-by-frame discussion so that we can break it down effectively and we can see certain patterns. Now, you'll notice a few things right from the get-go that she has got great humor. She's able to structure her presentation in a manner that is followable. She doesn't talk about statistics, percentages, and stuff like that. Instead, she talks to the soul of the individual. She's kind of putting her mind into your mind as if whatever she's saying about herself is what you would say about yourself. So that's a fascinating approach. And what I've come to appreciate greatly about Brene Brown's presentation is that she makes it real, and rather than talk about vulnerability, she shows it. So she intersperses all the facts and figures surrounding vulnerability in between her own struggles. When you start sharing your own struggles, other people will connect with those struggles, and especially on a topic like vulnerability, they're going to start thinking about your vulnerability, right? So that makes her a far more credible speaker than probably any of the other speakers I've ever heard. What she's doing, and you take a look at her entire presentation, she's trying to say that she starts in one location, but the answer is somewhere else. And the more she moves towards it, there's this resistance, this pressure to want to pull out of that fight because she knows she's going to lose. But it's not a fight. She's not going to lose anything. She just thinks so. And most of us will probably get there and think that it's so embarrassing, why am I going to talk about this? But yet, people want to hear the embarrassing stuff about you, don't they? So that's an interesting voyeuristic tendency that we all have. And I believe she's exploiting that as part of her ability to connect with the audience very, very thoroughly and very well. So I'd suggest that you take a look at this. I'll point out some of these examples, how she creates this tension, and then how she causes this tension to get smoothed over. When she swaps from an academic mode into a more storytelling mode, when she sets up something and then she causes it to crash all the way down, and when she sets it up, she probably knows that the audience can tell that it's not going to work. And she does that time and time and time again, thereby forcing us to have to keep doing this separation, coming close and then separating again, coming close. It's a classic storyline, hero's journey. So this experience of going through it several times in one presentation is amazing. It's artistry at its best. So let's take a look at what's going on here. So I'm speeding it up because I know it's going to take about 20 minutes to really get to the end. So
I'll start with this. A couple years ago, an event planner called me because I was going to do a speaking event, and she called and she said, I'm really struggling with how to write about you on a little flyer. And I thought, well, what's the struggle? And she said, well, I saw you speak, and I'm going to call you a researcher, I think, but I'm afraid if I call you a researcher, no one will come because they'll think you're boring and irrelevant. And I said, okay. And she said, but the thing I liked about your talk is, you're a storyteller, so I think what I'll do is just call you a storyteller. And of course, the academic, insecure part of me was like, you're going to call me a what? And she said, I'm going to call you a storyteller. And I was like, oh, why not Magic Pixie? I was like, let me think about this for a second. And so I tried to call deep on my courage, and I thought, I am a storyteller. I'm a qualitative researcher. I collect stories. That's what I do. And maybe stories are just data with a soul, and maybe I'm just a storyteller. So I said, you know what? Why don't you just say I'm a researcher storyteller? And she went, there's no such thing.
So at this juncture is 1.5 minutes. She's timed it where she's gotten at least 4 chuckles from the audience, established rapport, and she's already initiated vulnerability, right? Because she's being challenged right now. She says with exasperation, you're going to call me a what? You could literally just lift this strategy and put it into any one of your speeches, right? Where someone wants to call you something, but then you're held by another identity. So that's something that she's kind of like surfing, the question of identity. Am I X or am I Y? Am I a researcher or am I a storyteller? She tries to say, I'm a researcher storyteller, and then she's ridiculed once again. There is no such thing. So this calls on a certain state, a certain way of doing it, which is self-deprecating in nature, but it also speaks to other people where they're trying to find their sense of identity. And this is really powerful. If you can craft a presentation that centers around a person's identity or an audience's identity and flirt with it for a while. That's exactly what she's going to do throughout the entire presentation. In fact, if you boil it down to just the academic science, it's probably about 2 minutes of real facts in there.
I'm a researcher or storyteller. And I'm going to talk to you today. We're talking about expanding perception. And so I want to talk to you and tell some stories about a piece of my research that fundamentally expanded my perception and really actually changed the way that I live and love and work and parent. And this is where my story starts. When I was a young researcher, a doctoral student, my first year I had a research professor who said to us, here's the thing, if you cannot measure it, it does not exist. And I thought he was just sweet talking to me. I was like, really? And he's like, absolutely. So you have to understand that I have a bachelor's in social work, a master's in social work, and I was doing my PhD in social work. So my entire academic career was surrounded by people who kind of believed in the life's messy, love it.
In this particular case, she is setting herself up again, right? So there's this preamble for about 45 seconds, and she's attempting to flesh out her academic history and to demonstrate where her journey began. Notice she's doing some subtle weaving of credibility here. She's telling you she's a doctoral holder, right?
Or the life's messy, clean it up, organize it, and put it into a bento box.
So she's, again, bringing up some contrast, the contrast between life's messy, embrace it, versus life's messy, put it in a bento box. It's funny how she utilizes these words because life's messy, embrace it. Embrace is a word that you can visualize. Bento box is also something you can visualize, and you can see these small little boxes there. And what she is trying to say now is that there's a difference between what's happening in my life and how I feel and what is actually showing up for me, right? So the things that she's having these contrasts with, as I mentioned, is a form of resistance that she's attempting to build out so that the ending will be satisfying.
And so to think that I had found my way, to found a career that takes me, really one of the big sayings in social work is lean into the discomfort of the work. And I'm like, knock discomfort upside the head and move it over and get all A's. That was my mantra.
So again, the nature of the world versus the way she is in conflict. She's explicitly mentioning this conflict a couple of times because it's going to have a callback effect later on.
So I was very excited about this. And so I thought, you know what, this is a career for me because I am interested in some messy topics, but I want to be able to make them not messy. I want to understand them. I want to hack into these things that I know are important and lay the code out for everyone to see. So where I started was with connection, because by the time you're a social worker for 10 years, what you realize is that connection is why we're here.
Notice there's a subtle shift of pronouns. She's talking about me, I, and now she's saying our, we. Okay, so there's this shift. So you don't know whether she's talking about herself, we collectively as social workers, or whether it's we as an audience.
It's what gives purpose and meaning to our lives. This is what it's all about. It doesn't matter whether you talk to people who work in social justice and mental health and abuse and neglect. What we know is that connection, the ability to feel connected, is neurobiologically, that's how we're wired, it's why we're here. So I thought, you know what, I'm going to start with connection. Well, you know that situation where you get an evaluation from your boss and she tells you 37 things that you do really awesome and one thing that you kind of have an opportunity for growth. And all you think about is that opportunity for growth, right? Well, apparently this is the way my work went as well, because when you ask people about love, they tell you about heartbreak. When you ask people about belonging, they'll tell you the most excruciating experiences of being excluded. And when you ask people about connection, the stories they told me were about disconnection. So very quickly, really about...
Now, notice the direction she's bringing the audience in terms of emotional state. It's you want the highs, but then you get the lows. That's basically what she's communicating. And she's literally driving a wedge between what the audience wants and what really is being shown up in her research.
About 6 weeks into this research, I ran into this unnamed thing that absolutely unraveled connection.
So you'll notice this almost puts it in the frame of like a mystery, like a journey, Indiana Jones, something like that. And she's cleverly weaving this as a journey that you can participate in together with me.
In a way that I didn't understand or had never seen. And so I pulled back out of the research and thought, I need to figure out what this is. And it turned out to be shame. And shame is really easily understood as the fear of disconnection. Is there something about me that if other people know it or see it, that I won't be worthy of connection? The things I can tell you about it, it's universal. We all have it. The only people who don't experience shame have no capacity for human.
That's normalizing. She's saying that all of us have it and it's normal.
Empathy or connection.
Now, when you're dealing with very difficult emotions in an audience, this is necessary. Now, it's just 5 minutes into a presentation, and she's already starting to normalize and make it safe for people to be here with her.
No one wants to talk about it, and the less you talk about it, the more you have it. What underpinned this shame, this I'm not good enough, which we all know that feeling, I'm not blank enough, I'm not thin enough, rich enough, beautiful enough, smart enough, promoted enough. The thing that underpinned this was excruciating vulnerability. This idea of in order for connection to happen, we have to allow ourselves to be seen, really seen. And you know how I feel about vulnerability. I hate vulnerability. And
so it's ironic because now she's a researcher talking about shame and vulnerability, and she's saying that she hates vulnerability. So again, the idea of a walking paradox. Okay, she starts off with researcher storyteller, walking paradox. Now she's going vulnerability researcher who hates vulnerability. Same theme, different words.
So I thought, this is my chance to beat it back with my measuring stick.
So again, this is hyperbole. Beating it back with a measuring stick, you're doing something with something else that doesn't make sense. It just simply has certain kinds of characteristics like, yeah, it's a stick, but you don't beat people up with a measuring stick. Right?
I'm going in, I'm going to figure this stuff out, I'm going to spend a year, I'm going to totally deconstruct shame, I'm going to understand how vulnerability works, and I'm going to outsmart it.
So how can you outsmart vulnerability? The fact that she says it this way is setting herself up for failure, right? So you're bringing up this whole thing. You say it's 1 year, it's going to turn out to be 6 years, and then she's going to destroy it because the precursor thought was either unreasonable or unrealistic, and then she's going to cause it to crash down. And the audience will see this pattern moving forward.
So I was ready, and I was really excited. As you know, it's not going to turn out well.
So she explicates this. As we all know, truth can be very funny. So you can do it to a point where you know what the audience is likely to be thinking. Explicate whatever the audience is thinking.
You know this. So I can tell you a lot about shame, but I'd have to borrow everyone else's time. But here's what I can tell you that it boils down to. And this may be one of the most important things I've ever learned in the decade of doing this research. My 1 year turned into 6 years.
Point of failure.
Thousands of stories, hundreds of long interviews, focus groups. At one point, people were sending me journal pages and sending me their stories, thousands of pieces of data, and 6 years.
So what she's doing is she's again subtly crafting her credibility. And at the same time, when you think about it, thousands and thousands and thousands, it's a build-up, isn't it? So inside the mind, you're actually amplifying your mental submodalities. The representation inside your head is getting maybe cluttered. It's complex, it's huge, right? And see what she does with it in a single sentence.
I kind of got a handle on it. I kind of understood this is what shame is, this is how it works. I wrote a book, I published a theory.
Again, credibility, the big things, right? Being a book author is not a simple thing. Publishing papers is not an easy thing either.
But something was not okay. And what it was is that if I roughly took the people I interviewed and divided them into people who really have a sense of worthiness, that's what this comes down to, a sense of worthiness. They have a strong sense of love and belonging. And folks who struggle for it, and folks who are always wondering if they're good enough. There was only one variable that separated the people who have a strong sense of love and belonging and the people who really struggle for it, and that was the people who have a strong sense of love and belonging believe they're worthy of love and belonging.
So again, she sets this whole thing up. 6 years, thousands of papers, published a book, and all that for one sentence. You believe whether or not you're worthy makes you worthy.
They believe they're worthy. And to me, the hard part of the one thing that keeps us out of connection is our fear that we're not worthy of connection, was something that personally and professionally I felt like I needed to understand better. So what I did is I took all of the interviews where I saw worthiness, where I saw people living that way, and just looked at those. What do these people have in common? And
in a hero's journey, this is a point where she's starting to cross the threshold, right? She's questioning her reality and she's attempting to get back to her reality. And she does it in her old way.
I have a slight office supply addiction, but it's another talk. So I had a manila notebook, a manila folder, and I had a Sharpie, and I was like, what am I going to call this research? And the first words that came to my mind were wholehearted.
Now, bear this in mind because the word wholehearted has got implications. She's going to call back on it later.
These are kind of wholehearted people living from this deep sense of worthiness. So I wrote at the top of the manila folder, and I started looking at the data. In fact, I did it first in this in a 4-day, very intensive data analysis where I went back, pulled these interviews, pulled the stories, pulled the incidents. What's the theme? What's the pattern? My husband left town with the kids. Because
So again, a contrast, right? The way she is and the way people are receiving her, completely different. Don't you think the audience is going to feel exactly the same way? It's the way she's doing it, the great level of intensity she's saying it with, and even for themselves, they could probably picture themselves in her shoes as if they were doing some form of research or something very intense that was important to them that kind of like just pisses people off.
I always go into the kind of Jackson Pollock crazy thing where I'm just like writing and going and kind of just in my researcher mode. And so here's what I found. What they had in common was a sense of courage. And I want to separate courage and bravery for you for a minute. Courage, the original definition of courage, when it first came into the English language, is from the Latin word cur, meaning heart. And the original definition was to tell the story of who you are with your whole heart.
See, this comes back again. So she's got these loops going on within her presentation that you're not conscious about until you literally break it down. These in neurolinguistic programming are called nested loops. And when you nest these loops and it comes full circle, whatever information that has already been embedded inside is taken in unconsciously. It's a very powerful strategy. I don't have time to talk about it on this video, but maybe I'll dedicate some time to talk about it later on.
And so these folks had, very simply, the courage to be imperfect. They had the compassion to be kind to themselves first and then to others, because as it turns out, we can't practice compassion with other people if we can't.
Notice that as she's expressing this, she's back into the we. Is it her experience, or is it the collective audience's experience, or is it her as a social worker? We can't quite tell, right? But it's that kind of ambiguity that allows her to have the authority to speak things simply because she's already demonstrating her difficulties with the subject itself, right?
Treat ourselves kindly. And the last was they had connection, and this was the hard part, as a result of authenticity. They were willing to let go of who they thought they should be in order to be who they were, which is, you have to absolutely do that for connection.
So it's interesting. At this point of time, notice that her speed has kind of slowed down. She's got much longer pauses in between her words.
The other thing that they had in common was this. They fully embrace vulnerability.
So you'll notice that she's doing research, right? She's kind of like saying, okay, from shame to vulnerability. And she's also saying that she's looked at this data of two separate groups of people who accept versus don't accept their worthiness. And now she's uncovering something. She's unlocking something. She's dusting away the buried treasure chest, and she's about to unravel it to you. And there's something surprising there.
They believed that what made them vulnerable made them beautiful. They didn't talk about vulnerability being comfortable, nor did they really talk about it being excruciating, as I had heard earlier in the shame interviewing. They just talked about it being necessary. They talked about the willingness to say, I love you first. The willingness to do something where there are no guarantees.
She's again using layered amplifiers. So she uses 3 or 4 descriptors in order to amplify the connection or to amplify the emotional state. In this case, she's peppering it across different scenarios. Mothers, people who say who are in love, parents, and so on, so that she can pick from different audience members to resonate with.
The willingness to breathe through waiting for the doctor to call after your mammogram. The willing to invest in a relationship that may or may not work out. They thought this was fundamental. I personally thought it was betrayal.
Again, separation. So she's amplifying something, she's building it up, and later on you'll see her cause it to crash.
I could not believe I had pledged allegiance to research, where our job, the definition of research is to control and predict, to study phenomenon for the explicit reason to control and predict. And now my my mission to control and predict had turned up the answer that the way to live is with vulnerability and to stop controlling and predicting. This led to,
again, walking paradox, right? Control and predict versus live without control and the need to predict.
a little breakdown.
So again, this is a very useful tool. You can look at breakdown in small letters, and then later on she blows it up and visually it amplifies, thereby signifying an emotional amplification as well.
Which actually looked more like this. And it did. It led to I call it a breakdown, my therapist calls it a spiritual awakening.
So this is known as a reframe, right? But when you say it that way, it sounds a little bit condescending, and therefore it doesn't work. But in this particular case, it is a funny usage of my therapist says so.
Spiritual awakening sounds better than breakdown, but I assure you it was a breakdown. And I had to put my data away and go find a therapist. Let me tell you something. You know who you are when you call your friends and say, I think I need to see somebody. Do you have any recommendations? Because about 5 of my friends were like, woo, I wouldn't want to be your therapist.
Again, she's coming to confront herself, right? It's vulnerability in and of itself, but she says it in such a funny way that people can't help but let the defenses down. This is the power of being vulnerable, to share the embarrassing things, to share what you thought you were, but then other people just expose you, right? And by letting other people be the instrument of your expose, you are exposing yourself to your audience, which is a very, very powerful double looped kind of an effect. So this is a vulnerability conversation talking about vulnerability.
And I was like, what does that mean? And they're like, I'm just saying, like, don't bring a measuring stick.
So again, a callback. Don't bring a measuring stick. Measuring stick was previously used for beating vulnerability into submission.
Like, okay. So I found a therapist. My first meeting with her, Diana, I brought in my list of the way the wholehearted live. And I sat down and she said, how are you? And I said,
this is a setup. You can actually sense it already. You have to do the setup in order for the humor to be created. So there's a pretext followed by the punchline.
I'm great, I'm okay. And she said, what's going on? And I said, and this is a therapist who sees therapists because we have to go to those because their BS meters are good. And so I said, here's the thing, I'm struggling. And she said, what's the struggle? And I said, well, I have a vulnerability issue. And, and I know that vulnerability is kind of the core of shame and fear and our struggle for worthiness, but it appears that it's also the birthplace of joy, of creativity, of belonging, of love. And I think I have a problem. And I need some help. And I said, but here's the thing, no family stuff, no childhood shit. I just need some strategies.
Now, here's the thing. This is normal for a lot of people who are in denial in therapy. As a therapist, I look at this as really funny because patients are like this. The audience knows this because, the North American population is quite commonly involved in some form of psychotherapy or other. So she is sheepishly putting this across because she knows the audience knows.
Thank you. So she goes like this.
She's utilizing tropes, right? So memes of specific kinds of therapeutic behavior will be seen and can be detected by people who have actually been with therapists because it's such a common trend, right? And people will be able to recognize it. And by putting it in this light, on one hand, it is her experience of the therapist. On the other hand, other people who've resisted therapy probably feel exactly the same. You're reading my mind, Brene.
And then I said, it's bad, right? And she said, it's neither good nor bad. It just is what it is. And I said, oh my God, this is going to suck.
So this is, again, really funny because now she's going to be building a bridge, but the bridge has got like a huge ravine and rapids down below. So she's trying to cross, but it's so difficult for her emotionally, psychologically, even physically.
And it did, and it didn't. And it took about a year. And you know how there are people that, like, when they realize that vulnerability and tenderness are important, that they kind of surrender and walk into it? A, that's not me. And B, I don't even hang out with people like that. For me, it was a year-long street fight. It was a slugfest.
Street fight, slugfest, different images. So you'll notice that she utilizes analogy in a very powerful way, and you ought to come up with this kind of hyperbole, right? Let's say you're talking about cooking. You're not just cooking, it was dynamite. Something along those lines that makes it really, really explosive. Maybe even to the extent of, even a supernova would have paled in comparison. So this is hyperbole, right? This idea is common across and is thematic across her presentation here, and something definitely you'll want to exploit.
Vulnerability pushed, I pushed back. I lost the fight, but probably won my life back. And so then I went back into the research and spent the next couple of years really trying to understand what the wholehearted, what the choices they were making, and what are we doing with vulnerability? Why do we struggle with it so much? Am I alone in struggling with vulnerability?
And this is a very good question because everyone else, by the time she's mentioning all this, and she's creating this gap of intention versus reality, and they don't quite match up, but she answers her own question.
No. So this is what I learned.
By the way, it's a useful technique. Ask a question, pause, and answer the question on behalf of the entire audience.
We numb vulnerability. When we're waiting for the call, it was funny. I sent something out on Twitter and on Facebook that says, how would you define vulnerability? What makes you feel vulnerable? And within an hour and a half, I had 150 responses. Because I wanted to know, what's out there. Having to ask my husband for help because I'm sick and we're newly married. Initiating sex with my husband. Initiating sex with my wife. Being turned down. Asking someone out. Waiting.
You'll notice that she's doing the same thing as she did before, which was highlighting different examples for the audience to acknowledge and to come to terms with. She's doing exactly the same thing. It's a repetition, and she's in this kind of a looped structure that enables this presentation to be an awesome one.
Waiting for the doctor to call back. Getting laid off. Laying off people. This is the world we live in. We live in a vulnerable world. And one of the ways we deal with it is we numb vulnerability. And I think there's evidence, and it's not the only reason this evidence exists, but I think that it's a huge cause. We are the most in debt, obese, addicted, and medicated adult cohort in U.S. history. The problem is, and I learned this from the research, that you cannot selectively numb emotion. You can't say, here's the bad stuff. Here's vulnerability, here's grief, here's shame, here's fear, here's disappointment. I don't want to feel these. I'm going to have a couple of beers and a banana nut muffin. I don't want to feel these. And I know that's knowing laughter. I hack into your lives for a living. I know that's, God.
So this is a very interesting way of explicating the thoughts of the audience again. She's utilizing this tool. So that's knowing laughter. I know because I hack into your lives. And she's giving this knowing laughter, right? Helping the audience to recognize that this is what they look like is a form of mirroring. You literally can mirror exactly what the audience is giving to you and then make fun of the audience. Remember, now she's gone from making fun of herself to making fun of the audience, and the audience is okay. Right? It's powerful. So she's created this whole thing that I'm like you. If I'm laughing at myself and you're laughing at me, now I have the permission to laugh at you too, and actually we're all laughing at each other, right?
You can't numb those hard feelings without numbing the other affects or emotions. You cannot selectively numb. So when we numb those, we numb joy. We numb gratitude. We numb happiness.
So notice this layering again, multiple descriptions, multiple words, repetition of phrases. These add to the emphasis and the gravity of the situation. So you can utilize this tool in any kind of presentation you're making.
And then we are miserable and we are looking for purpose and meaning. And then we feel vulnerable. So then we have a couple of beers and a banana nut muffin. And it becomes this dangerous cycle. One of the things that I think that we need to think about is why and how we numb. And it doesn't just have to be addiction. The other thing we do is we make everything that's uncertain certain. Religion has gone from a belief in faith and mystery to certainty. I'm right, you're wrong, shut up. That's it. Just certain. The more afraid we are, the more vulnerable we are, the more afraid we are. This is what politics looks like today. There's no discourse anymore. There's no conversation. There's just blame. You know how blame is described in the research? A way to discharge pain and discomfort. We perfect. If there's anyone who wants their life to look like this, it would be me. But it doesn't work, because what we do is we take fat from our butts and put it in our cheeks. Which just, I hope in 100 years people will look back and go, wow.
Again, this is a very interesting way of laughing at oneself, right? So the whole idea of liposuction and, Botox and all that kind of stuff.
And we perfect, most dangerously, our children. Let me tell you what we think about children. They're hardwired for struggle when they get here. When you hold those perfect little babies in your hand, our job is not to say, look at her, she's perfect. My job is just to keep her perfect, make sure she makes the tennis team by 5th grade and Yale by 7th grade. That's not our job. Our job is to look and say, you know what? You're imperfect and you're wired for struggle, but you are worthy of love and belonging. That's our job. Sure.
So this is a very powerful statement, right? And notice how she pauses it at the end of that in order for the audience to actually let those words seep in, something that you can do in your presentation as well.
There'll be a generation of kids raised like that, and we'll end the problems I think that we see today. We pretend that what we do doesn't have an effect on people. We do that in our personal lives. We do that corporate, whether it's a bailout, an oil spill, a recall. We pretend like what we're doing doesn't have a huge impact on other people. I would say to companies, this is not our first rodeo, people. We just need you to be authentic and real and say, we're sorry, we'll fix it. But there's another way, and I'll leave you with this.
So we come to the last minute or so where she's about to make her concluding statements, right? And it feels like it's just so long, but it's been peppered across an entire 20-minute presentation, of which all the key points that she's raised are peppered in between. You should structure your presentation like this as well, and also make sure that it's heartfelt, that whatever it is that you say is what you demonstrate and you mean, so that you can be the example on the stage that you're owning. She mentioned about those three things: numbing, making certain, and perfecting. And it's something that she's not trying to do at all. She's not numbing, for sure, right? Because if she were, like clinical, then that would be a problem. She's uncertain. She's literally utilizing pause fillers everywhere in her presentation. And she's not trying to be perfect, even though I would say that artistically, this presentation is perfect in its current form.
This is what I found. To let ourselves be seen, deeply seen, vulnerably seen. To love with our whole hearts, even though there's no guarantee. And that's really hard. And I can tell you as a parent, that's excruciatingly difficult. To practice gratitude and joy in those moments of kind of terror when we're wondering, can I love you this much? Can I believe in this as passionately? Can I be this fierce about this? Is to be able to stop and instead of catastrophizing what might happen, to say, I'm just so grateful because to feel this vulnerable means I'm alive. And the last, which I think is probably the most important, is to believe that we're enough. Because when we work from a place, I believe, that says, I'm enough, then we stop screaming and start listening. We're kinder and gentler to the people around us, and we're kinder and gentler to ourselves. That's all I have.
I'm noticing that there is a setup. There is symmetry first in terms of opposing forces. Good forces, white forces, negative forces, or dark forces. So once you have these in place, you can set yourself up or set the audience up to look at it as a fight. Once you notice that, consider who the enemy is. The enemy looks like it's these two things. You can use personification for this. Like she uses, like she was fighting vulnerability. She was beating it back with a measuring stick. You can personify it, but it's an imaginary monster you've created inside your mind. That kind of symmetry, you can do it in such a way where you're bringing a solution together and then finding that that's really not the solution. Or you reach a point and then you go like, there was something that was not right about it. You heard some of that Brene mentioned. So this kind of a tidal collision across ideas, the resistance points across these ideas are really, really crucial if you want to bring a solid point across. It's very, very powerful. So having said that, the next thing that you can do is to structure it such that your journey is about peaks and troughs, so that you have moments of success and achievement, but then you might reframe what that achievement actually is or sounds like. It may not be what you think. So this means that you're getting closer towards your journey through an unraveling of what are the lies compared with what you discover as the truth. So the mentor figure is a great figure. In a hero's journey structure, you'll always have a mentor figure. So you've got Yoda in Star Wars, and so on and so forth. You can include a person like that, a mentor figure who comes in and helps you to unravel and to understand what you could never have understood. So that was a turning point because it showed her that she was no longer in control, right? So that therapeutic intervention for 1 year caused her to have good and bad times so that she could unravel herself. It was a turning point. Now, after that, you can reveal anything about yourself. But one of the structures that she does is, if it's like point A to point B, here's the finale, here's the result, she could have told that in 5 minutes, but she extended it to 20 minutes because there were details inside that she could narrate, win people over by the process and the way she dealt with it, not necessarily by the end result of it. The end result is like, meh, what's the big deal? She ends up with symmetry as well. I think it's a nice way to balance things up. I think it would have been interesting to flesh out these 4 and 4. Towards the end, she mentions these are the 4 things: numbing, pretending, and so on, right? I don't remember them off the top of my head, but there are these 4 things, and then there are 4 things that we can do. Things like believe in ourselves, right? And so on. So it's kind of motivational, but yet it is in the frame of a loose end. They're basically not fleshed out very concretely. So on the note of whether or not the presentation was satisfying, I believe as a performance it was highly satisfying. From an informational standpoint, it probably was helpful, but didn't dive into the mechanics behind each and every one of those. So while it was nice, it was a little bit rushed toward the end, right? She could probably flesh things out, but you are going to end up like this as well. At the end of every presentation, dedicate sufficient time to produce the solutions. What are the solutions? Don't just leave a minute to it, rather leave a decent amount of time. If you split it up, what's the tension? What's the exaggeration of the tension? Where's the breaking point? Where's your mentor figure? Where's the transformation? And then what's the solution? Where you return home, and it will be so powerful. And I'm not faulting the presentation by any means. It will be so powerful that she mentions certain things that brings her back to the starting point where she sees the world in a completely different light. For example, yes, you can have gratitude and joy and all that kind of stuff. And let's say she continued with one segment where she did practice all of that, and then now her life is a little bit better. She's not sure what's going on, and that's okay. She's struggling with emotions, and it's difficult for her, and it's okay. So those kinds of resolution points, which are, I mean, of course, on hindsight, everything's 2020, but those make everything complete. If you want to do a powerful keynote, of course, TED being 18 to 20 minutes is not very fair. Very few people can produce this level of mastery in 18 to 20 minutes. And it takes years of constant speaking, constant curation of information, constant reflection that allows you to do all this. So if there's a moral of the lesson for this entire piece, firstly, don't just give an A to B thing. Bring people on a journey. Secondly, pace your timings out so that you'll be able to catch what is the end that is satisfying for the audience based on a resolution of your behaviors. And most importantly, don't just show them what needs to be done. Give them an example by you being the living example of what's in front of them. Be the role model that they never had in their lives. And you'll find that this entire presentation is going to blossom. Whatever presentation you're going to do is going to blossom. So I hope this has been useful. If you found it useful, please like, subscribe, hit the bell notification icon, and tell everybody who's going to deliver a presentation, because there is artistry in learning from other people's models of presentations. And I hope that while we're learning about vulnerability, we can also be a little bit vulnerable. This wasn't the best setup. I had to do this entire presentation about 5 times because there were mic complications, there were camera complications, amongst other things. But it does help that individuals are going to be able to be benefiting from this presentation, I hope. So leave me your comments, let me know what it is that you benefited from as best as you can. And if you got someone else in mind for me to analyze, let me know. I'll be very happy to break that down for you so that you'll be able to learn patterns, broader overarching patterns, especially since you don't or may not have the skill set of modeling after some of these scripted patterns, and may not be able to see what I see. So go ahead, share that in comments as well. I'll be very happy to create the next piece with you. So once again, help me to get to more people. Share this with your friends and family members so that we can collectively elevate society to a level that transcends pain and suffering, so that these people will be able to take their actions for abundance.